A Fox News alert on the fate of the Democratic rebuttal to the GOP FISA memo, with the White House now reviewing that document. So will you get to see it? That's the question this morning. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Melissa Francis. President Trump has until Friday to block the release of the Democrats' counter memo. The version written by Adam Schiff, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, is said to be lengthier than the GOP one and not as clean. Still, the White House says that 10-page document will undergo, quote, the exact same legal and national security review process as the GOP memo. And Schiff believes the president would be hard-pressed to stop it from going forward.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts live with more on this. John.
John, good morning. The White House likely would be hard-pressed to stop that memo from going forward, but the White House and other Republicans now talking about the idea that the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, is laying a trap for the White House with this memo. We reported this all day yesterday. Now the White House and other Republicans are talking about the idea that in this memo there is a significant amount of information that goes to sources and methods that would either have to be redacted or perhaps lead to objections from the White House about its declassification. Listen to what the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, said yesterday on Capitol Hill.
We'll brief the president on it, and he'll have a decision to make as to what he wants to do with it. Should he do the same thing he did on the first memo and essentially declassify it, or should he declassify it with some redactions? This is not as clean a memo as the first one.
This is not as clean a memo as the first one, meaning information in there, and I'm told there's quite a bit of it that will either have to be taken out or the president just object to its declassification. The White House smells a scheme here for the Democrats to say there's a double standard in how the Democratic memo is being treated compared to the GOP memo last week. That memo was released with no redactions. Trey Gowdy believes the same thing. First, let's hear from Gowdy and then the White House.
The Democrats are politically smart enough to put things in the memo that require either the Bureau or the Department of Justice to say it needs to be redacted. Therefore, it creates this belief that there's something being hidden from the American people.
The Democrats are playing politics with people's lives here, and that they tried to load in sources and methods so that we'd have to redact it so they could claim some type of political bias against them.
And more revelations today from the text message chain between FBI agent Peter Strzok and his then lover, FBI attorney Lisa Page. New text messages reveal that on September the 2nd, 2016, Page texts Strzok about preparing talking points for FBI Director James Comey, saying, quote, POTUS wants to know everything we're doing, raising questions about then President Obama's involvement or at least interest in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Then, after the discovery of emails on Anthony Weiner's computer, September 28th, 2016, Strzok writes, quote, got called up to Andy's, that's Andrew McCabe's office earlier. That's the deputy director of the FBI, who just recently resigned. Hundreds of thousands of emails turned over by Weiner's attorney to SDNY, that's the Southern District of New York, U.S. Attorney's Office. It includes a ton of material from spouse Huma Abedin, sending team up tomorrow to review. This will never end. As we now know, it took a month from the time that those emails were discovered until James Comey went to Congress in late October to say that he was reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. On Election Day, Strzok and Page's disdain for President Trump is really laid bare. Page writes, quote, oh my God, this is blanking terrifying. Strzok replies, OMG, I am so depressed. A week later, Page writes, God, being here makes me angry. Lots of highfalutin national security talk. Meanwhile, we have our task ahead of us. We do not know what that task is, but this is really interesting, John. The last text message that was ever exchanged between the two, it was June 23rd, 2017. Lisa Page writes to Peter Strzok, quote, please don't ever text me again. We do not know the context of that tweet, but anybody who's received a tweet like that or that text message, but anyone who's ever received a text message like that could probably surmise what that's all about, John.
Yeah. And it raises questions as to why these tweets disappeared. I'm sorry, text messages, why they disappeared for so long. Was it innocuous? Was it something else?
And apparently there's more out there, too, that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz at the DOJ has that we'll probably learn about as time wears on here. John?
More fascinating revelations ahead. John Roberts, thank you.
To say the least. Wow. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson departing Colombia after a visit to the U.S. mission there. He is now flying to Jamaica, but he has Russia on his mind. An exclusive interview with Fox News, Secretary Tillerson saying Russia is trying to meddle with our elections again. This time they're going after the midterms. And he says America isn't prepared to stop it. Rich Edson is live in Bogota, Colombia, where Secretary Tillerson just departed about an hour ago. Rich.
Now, good morning, Melissa. And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says the United States can already see Russia trying to interfere in this year's midterm elections. And he says Russia's only inviting consequences by doing so, though he acknowledges there's only so much the U.S. can do to counteract that interference.
I don't know that I would say we're better prepared because the Russians will adapt as well. The point is, if it's their intention to interfere, they're going to find ways to do that. And we can take steps we can take, but this is something that once they decide they're going to do it, it's very difficult.
He also condemned Russian actions in Syria, providing air cover for the Assad regime and failing to rid that country of chemical weapons that it uses on its citizens. He also says Russia can deny that all he wants, but it needs to move to a different place on its actions in Syria. We also asked the Secretary of State whether Vice President Mike Pence, while he's traveling to the Olympics in South Korea, would attempt to initiate a conversation with North Korean officials while there. The Secretary of State said he would only say that Vice President Mike Pence is there, and we'll just have to see what happens. Melissa, back to you.
Yes, we will. Rich Edson, thanks so much.
Well, the Dow is rising again today after bouncing up and down this week. Up right now, almost 300 points. It is a reminder that nothing is set in stone. One of the headlines in the Wall Street Journal reads, cold numbers, upend midterm election assumptions. Stock market turbulence is a reminder that the landscape could shift dramatically before November. Let's talk about what it means for Congress and the midterm elections. The author of that article joins me now. Jerry Seid is executive Washington editor for the Wall Street Journal. So much has been made of, the slide in the stock market in recent days. But overall, it's still up more than 25% since President Trump took office.
Yeah, it's a reminder you need a little bit of perspective on all these things. On the one hand, it's probably political folly for any politician, in this case the president, I suppose, or any party, to put too much political stock in stock market numbers. They go up, they go down. You don't want to be responsible for the slide, which you can not really control. On the other hand, the environment's been pretty good for Republicans, in part because of a rising stock market over the last year, as you say, and they have been counting on improving economic confidence that emerged from that environment to be their best argument in the midterm elections this year. I think one of the things the slide in the stock market this week does is it raises the question of, well, is the edge taken off of that confidence at least a little bit? It's a reminder of how long there is to go and how many more things can happen before November.
Here's one of the lines in your piece that I wanted to share with our viewers. You wrote, for Republicans, the key is whether the real economic news can stay positive regardless of the stock market jitters, and whether the party can get more credit for it than Mr. Trump has so far. The economy's feel in the next few months is key. But one of the things that's going to be happening, and it is happening as of February, as of this month, people are starting to see more money in their take-home pay.
Right, and there is definitely a boost in perception as a result of that. You saw some of the numbers in polls turn around shortly after the tax cut was passed, and so maybe there was a connection there. I mean, the odds, the numbers that said people wanted Republicans to control Congress after the election started to go up after the tax bill was passed. That's a good thing. People having bonuses, that's obviously a good thing. More importantly, though, I think the underlying fundamentals need to remain sound for Republicans. You have to have unemployment stay low and economic growth stay at a strong pace. And it takes a while for those numbers to sink in. And I think those are both more important economic indicators for the political world than the level of the stock market is.
Here's what the president had to say about all of this morning in a tweet. He writes, in the old days when good news was reported, the stock market would go up. Today, when good news is reported, the stock market goes down. Big mistake, and we have so much great news about the economy. Again, I would remind even the president that, yes, the stock market is down substantially over the last few days, although it's up, 300 points right now today. But overall up significantly since the election.
Right, and it's also not true that when news is good, the stock market goes up. Often good news in the real economy is bad news for the stock market, because in this case, and that's exactly what's going on here, higher economic growth and even higher wages add up to the potential for more inflation, which adds up in turn to higher interest rates from the Fed, and that scares the markets. And so good news in the real economy often is bad news in the stock market, and there's certainly an element of that. In fact, that's probably the major explanation of what's going on right now. The markets worry about too much strength in the economy sometimes, as they are worrying right now.
And Democrats are pretty confident about their prospects come November. You say that might be a little bit premature also.
Well, look, what's happened in the last month or so is that public polling, including the poll we at the Wall Street Journal and NBC News do, shows that the percentage of Americans who say they want Democrats to control Congress after the midterm elections has been dropping. In our poll, it was 11% in December, it was down to 6% in January, and other polls on average have about the same kind of drop. So something happened to take a little bit of the edge off of what was a pretty good picture for the Democrats. But again, we're talking in February. We're looking forward into an election in November. In American politics right now, that gap of time is an eternity. So there will be lots of twists and turns.
And we'll have to see whether voters think they are getting crumbs in their paycheck, as House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said. All right, Jerry Seib from the Wall Street Journal. Good to have you on, Jerry. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
The clock is ticking to yet another government shutdown. Can you believe it? If lawmakers don't come to an agreement on a spending measure, will they be able to hammer out a deal? We're going to discuss that straight ahead. Plus, a new report has revealed that declassified information on U.S. military defense technology has been hacked by Russian cyber spies. How were they able to breach our defenses, and what exactly did they learn?
I think the Russian attempts to get at our personal email or official email or social media accounts represents a grave threat.
Right now, a disturbing new report reveals Russian hackers have successfully gained access to sensitive information about U.S. defense technology. Cyber spies were able to infiltrate classified data about our military drones, missiles, and stealth fighter jets. The hackers used phishing links that exploited weaknesses in poorly protected email accounts of high-tech defense contractors.
Now, the drones that Russia has acquired so far are, again, the micro UAVs that are really limited to artillery spotting or battlefield reconnaissance and surveillance. But the drones that they're looking to acquire are more sophisticated and can carry out more types of missions than the ones they have now.
The data breach reportedly was only partial and extended from March 2015 to May 2016.
Right now, the budget battle playing out in Washington. The House passed a measure to keep the lights on in Washington, but only until March 23rd. The Senate is working on its own version. Yesterday, Senate leaders reportedly met to hash out a funding bill to avert a government shutdown. The deal would significantly boost both defense and domestic spending. The White House is hopeful lawmakers will come to an agreement.
I do not expect a shutdown right now. I think what the president's looking ahead to is the budget cap deal will put in place higher caps on defense spending that will allow the appropriators to then go write the bill that'll come to the president's desk probably at the end of March on spending for 2018.
Texas Congressman Jeb Hensarling is the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. Sir, thank you for joining us. I think a lot of Americans cannot believe that we are going through this again. What would you say to them?
Well, what I would say is that a majority of the House has voted to keep the government open. The last time this occurred, a majority of the Senate voted to keep the government open. But unfortunately, we have this odd Senate rule that calls for a supermajority to keep the government open, and that means Democrats can shut it down for unrelated items, which they did last time. So the House has now passed a bill, again, to keep the government open and to ensure that we fully fund our military, because we have men and women in uniform in harm's way that have been shortchanged. I mean, we've had more fatalities in training accidents than we have those actually killed in combat. And so, unfortunately, Democrats are holding holding our men and women in military hostage yet again. I hope as Republicans we don't let them get away with it, and the American people need to know this.
Congressman Duncan Hunter putting the blame squarely on the Senate. Listen to what he had to say a short time ago.
These are politicians. They've never met anybody in the military until they got into Congress. They used to be in the student body president, and now they're a congressman, right? They don't understand the impact that not doing a budget and doing these continuing resolutions over and over and over again, what that does to the military and how it hurts it. But now you have people dying, training. More than ever, right? You have them dying training here in the U.S. now, and I think that's starting to get through somewhat to these politicians here in D.C.
The problem is that Americans at home don't differentiate between you guys and senators. They just are going about their life trying to pay their bills and take care of their family, and they watch this and go, why can't these guys get their job done?
Well, again, that's why I accept invitations like this to come on your program to ensure that the American people know. I want the Senate to get rid of this so-called cloture rule that's not in the Constitution, not written into law, that allows a small minority to hold our military hostage. And I hope as Republicans that we don't pay ransom. And so what the Democrats are demanding is that we jack up all these funds for non-military spending, that we hasten the bankruptcy of our country. We shouldn't do it. We should allow the American people to see who's putting our troops in harm's way. And it's clearly the Democrats, and in this case, the Senate over my shoulder.
But Congressman, you know, people at home hear that as you all being hamstrung by rules that you created. And that feels ridiculous, because you could undo it as quickly as you did it, and to blame rules that senators created for themselves to Americans sounds like an excuse and is incredibly frustrating, and just leads to, even if you can demonstrate that you're not part of the problem, it makes Americans just throw up their hands and say, you know, the whole place is a big giant swamp.
It happens to be incredible reality, and as a House member, I cannot change Senate rules, and everybody learned in Civics 101, there are two chambers in this House. I work over in that one, the Senate's over here. It is a reality. They have this rule. Anybody who can hear this program, I urge you, contact your senator and say, stop the madness and allow, get the job done, and let the majority rule, and tell Democrats not to hold our military hostage, and to tell Republicans don't pay ransom, don't bankrupt the country in order to get our funding for the troops, to give the Democrats what they're demanding, that bankrupts our country and funds alphabet soup agency government, taking away our freedoms.
It does seem like we keep getting bogged down over there in the Senate. We'll see what happens there. Sir, thank you for coming on. Back to work. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Vice President Mike Pence is in Asia, putting new pressure on North Korea ahead of the Winter Olympics in South Korea. What the U.S. is planning to do as the rogue nation gets closer and closer to developing nuclear-capable ICBMs.
North Korea, as we discussed today, continues to threaten our country, Japan, and the wider world by supporting terrorism, developing nuclear weapons, and testing ballistic missiles.
Right now, Vice President Mike Pence is in Tokyo, reiterating Washington's stance on North Korea's nuclear threat while en route to South Korea for the Winter Olympics.
To that end, I'm announcing today that the United States of America will soon unveil the toughest and most aggressive round of economic sanctions on North Korea ever. And we will continue to isolate North Korea until it abandons its nuclear and ballistic missile program once and for all.
Well, let's bring in retired four-star General Jack Keane. He is chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and a Fox News senior strategic analyst. The vice president, among other things, is certainly keeping the pressure on North Korea with his words in Asia. General.
Yeah, that's a fact. I mean, maximum pressure is the way the administration defines it. And from my sources, you know, we've shut down about 70 to 80% of their revenue sources and other commodities, but that still means that things are slipping through. So I think that's what the vice president's about here. He wants to shut this door completely. I suspect that China is also still providing them some assistance. And we know for a fact, John, that they're gaining some some oil and some other resources from the sea. And I think what we should do is blockade that and shut that down, too, as part of our economic sanctions, just shut off that door entirely. So, yes, we got to get tough, because the CIA director told us right here on Fox not too long ago that we're just months away from nuclearized ICBMs capable of reaching the United States, having solved the technology challenge of re-entry. So that's months away, and we've got a showdown coming, and we've got to start pulling out all the stops.
You advocate a blockade. When the Kim regime feels boxed in, they tend to lash out. Is there the possibility that they would lash out with a military strike in response to a blockade?
Well, that's a plausible question, certainly, and it certainly would be a part of the discussion when the president is provided that option. But I also take heart with what Pompeo told us, the director of the CIA. He said he believed that Kim Jong-un is a rational actor, despite his bellicose language and other atmospherics. So if you accept the fact that he's a rational actor, we're already strangling him economically with other countries shutting it down. The blockade would be part of economic sanctions. I don't believe he would react to that, because he hasn't reacted to the other economic sanctions. And I think it's something we should do. I also think we should be conducting very aggressive cyber attack against him now. His information, finance, banking, and energy systems, they're limited by comparison to an industrialized state, to be sure, but he should feel the pain that we can inflict on him.
In the meantime, there's another issue coming out of the Pentagon that I wanted to ask you about. They are adopting a new policy that would remove military members who've been non-deployable for the past 12 months or more. It's one of the new Defense Department policies under final review. The idea is what, General? That some of our troops are simply out of shape and not ready to go fight a battle?
Well, what has happened, our non-deployables have spiked. And when you can't deploy, that affects the readiness of an organization. And when we have a couple of 100,000 of them, like is what we have, then that means that those organizations have missed those people, and we have to put others in them. Being the military is the smallest it's been in 75 years, we cannot make up for that 235,000 that we're missing. So we're going to get tough on this. Most of it has to do with our processing, John. It's not so much the individual troop themselves. It's that our system is not efficient enough to really process these people, get them taken care of properly, get them done administratively, and also move them out of the system if they no longer can obviously make a contribution.
And it should be pointed out that those who have been wounded in battle can be exempted from this order.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, we're a compassionate organization. People have sacrificed for us and have the potential to provide full duty in the future. We're going to certainly underwrite that.
I want to get your take on some new orders from President Trump. He is wanting the Pentagon to plan a military parade in Washington honoring our armed forces later this year. We don't see that kind of thing very often in this country. What do you think about it, General?
Yeah, well, that comes as a result of Bastille Day in July in Paris, the Champs-Élysées, and he saw a very impressive French parade. Look at John. If the president wants a military parade, the Pentagon's going to give them to him. But let me tell you a few things. We don't parade. We train and we fight, all right? These European militaries and some of these other guys, they dress up in these fancy outfits. They got unbelievably fancy uniforms, gold braids, sabers all over the place, shiny helmets. I mean, we're a pragmatic military. We reflect the American people. We're informal. Our uniforms are dull by comparison. And what we do is we train and we fight. And we bear the burdens all around the world. These other guys, they do a lot more parading than they do fighting. But if the president wants a parade from the United States military, he'll get his parade.
But you wouldn't expect to see a Trident missile rolling past the Washington Monument.
Oh, no way. No way. We are not Russia, China, or North Korea. That's for sure.
All right. Interesting times ahead. General Jack Keane, good to have you on. Thank you.
Yeah, good talking to you, John.
More text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page raising new concerns about the Clinton email investigation. What these texts say that have a Senate committee questioning the FBI handling of the probe.
A worrisome outbreak at the Olympics with dozens of workers sickened by the norovirus. South Korea is now deploying 900 military personnel to help out with security after 1,200 members of the Games security staff were confined to their rooms while being tested for the contagious illness. Norovirus causes stomach pain, nausea, and diarrhea. The most effective way to stop its spread is with hand washing and simple good hygiene.
New text messages uncovered between the FBI agent Peter Strzok and attorney Lisa Page, casting more doubt on the FBI's Clinton email investigation. One text in particular saying that then President Obama wanted to, quote, know everything we were doing. No clear indication what that text refers to, but Republican lawmakers say it raises serious questions about President Obama's personal involvement in the probe. Here is Congressman Louis Gohmert this morning on Fox and Friends.
Well, you know, it means the president wants to know what they're doing to try to stop Trump, because that's clearly, from all the other text messages, that's what they were working on, that's what they cared about. And so, you know, we need to find out. We can't be like the FISA court. We've got to actually have the facts. We need to get to the bottom of this and find out what the president knew.
All right, let's bring in our panel, political commentator and professor at Johns Hopkins University, Wendy Osefo, and we also have Fox News contributor Rachel Campos Duffy. Rachel, I don't know if it necessarily means what you just heard there. It could mean, you know, that he wanted to be consulted at the time they were editing that speech for FBI Director James Comey when he came out and explained sort of what the email investigation had come to and why they were deciding not to pursue it any longer. Does it matter if do you think that's what he wanted to know about, and why does that matter?
I think it all matters. I mean, look, where there's smoke, there's fire. We at least need to ask the questions. There's a reason why the FBI and the DOJ were trying to block these text messages from coming out. You have to ask yourself, what do they have to hide? And this could be about the Hillary. This part looks like it was about the Hillary Clinton investigation. President Obama clearly had a stake in her being exonerated and Trump not winning the election. So there's a lot of questions, and we can't just say, well, you know, maybe. I mean, I think there's a reason why they were blocking these, and the American people deserve to know. This is just like a mystery. It keeps unfolding, and it gets dirtier and dirtier, and now we know it goes to the top.
President Trump tweeting just moments ago, these new FBI texts are bombshells. Wendy, what do you think about that? What do you make of the texts?
This is just another tile in the mosaic to try to discredit our intelligence community as well as the FBI. We know that on September 28th, Andrew McCabe briefed his team, and then on October 28th, Comey went out and said, you know, I just received new text messages and I need to basically reopen this case against Hillary Clinton, rather new emails. So it is okay that they are investigating this, but let's not make this seem as though this discredits or it undermines our intelligence community. That is not the case. Robert Mueller has been said time and time again to have the confidence of the Republicans. He has been said time and time again to be doing a good job.
Let me give you another
so
chance,
I don't understand.
Because we aren't talking about either of those things. We're talking about the text where
we are talking about the text messages, and that's what I'm addressing.
We're talking about the text message where he says we have to. POTUS wants to know everything that we're doing. That's what we're talking about. What do you think that meant?
And what it means is exactly what it means. If you ask me a question, let me answer. What it means is, again, we are trying to undermine individuals in our intelligence community, and that is what I said the first time, and that's what I mean. It has nothing to do with Obama saying he wants to know more about them trying to sabotage Trump. That, by all means, it doesn't say that. We have no evidence to say that.
Trump's not even in this. I mean, this has absolutely nothing to do with President Trump. This is about the text message that went out between them about the president wanting to be informed before James Comey made a speech about Hillary Clinton. Mueller and Trump are not part of this particular conversation.
And yes, it is, and that is what they're trying to say here. That's exactly what you guys are trying to say. That's what we're trying to pivot to.
Rachel, go ahead.
I just want to say it's important to note who Peter Strzok is, so there's context to these text messages. This is not an intern at the FBI. FBI. This is somebody who was central to the investigation. We know that he sat in on the interview with Hillary Clinton. He is the one who changed the language in the first draft of Hillary's exoneration so that it went from being a criminal language to negligent. And we know that that draft was made before they even interviewed her. So we knew the fix was in. The fact that the president's now, according to these text messages, asking for a briefing. In this batch of emails, it also came out that later, after Donald Trump won the election, they said they were exchanging emails where he said, you know, I'm pulling out my video of all the president's men, referring to Watergate. So these are all questions. These two individuals, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, need to be brought in. We need to know exactly what this means, and maybe they should be getting a deal.
How are you saying it's not about
point
Trump?
fingers all the way to the top. This smells very bad.
Hang on, go ahead, Wendy.
No, I just find it laughable that we say that this is now about Trump when the Democrat talks about it, but then when someone on the other side brings up Trump and talks about the text messages in context to Trump, we then continue to say, oh, they need to be brought in to be investigated. This has to do with our national...
you know darn well...
Let me finish. Let me finish. This has to do with the American people being misled. That's what this has to do with. This is not partisan. This is not the left or the right. This is us trying to mislead people to say that there was more going on in the Federal Bureau of Investigations than what meets the eye. And that is categorically incorrect. And that is the issue.
Wendy knows darn well that if secret texts had been discovered showing President Trump asking about the investigation, she would be all over this.
I wouldn't, because they no longer work in the investigation.
Seconds left. Wendy, can I ask you a question?
Transparency.
Real quick,
radical
Wendy.
Transparency.
Would it matter to you if the president were briefed on those changes in James Comey's speech, on saying the language, changing it so that Hillary Clinton was not then, they weren't pursuing it later, and he was told that DOJ wasn't going to go after her, and he wanted to be kept up to date on that portion of it? Do you see anything wrong with that?
I see something wrong with the length in which we are saying, okay, Obama wants to know what's going on. But what I am saying is that we do not know why he wanted to know what's going on. Furthermore, what I think is the biggest issue and the biggest breath of sigh for everyone is that these FBI agents are no longer on this investigation. And that is what the American people should be focused on. If they were still working this, then we would have a point here, but they are not.
Let's go. Guys, thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the White House is weighing now whether to declassify and release the Democrats' rebuttal to the GOP FISA memo. But Republicans are suggesting the Democrats drafted this memo as a political trap.